An organization without planning is like a sailboat minus its rudder. I mean, think about it. Without a rudder, a boat is totally at the mercy of the wind and the currents, right? Just drifting aimlessly. But with one, you become the master navigator of your destination. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to figure out exactly how to grab hold of that steering mechanism. We're diving into the Master Navigator, Principles of Effective Organizational Planning. We are going to sift through all this dense management theory and extract a highly practical playbook. Because look, whether you're leading a massive corporation, managing a small scrappy team, or just trying to organize a wildly complex project, we're going to see how we can shift from just reactive drifting into proactive execution. Okay, let's map out our journey. We'll start with the rudder of your business, then look at the 3 levels of planning and the types of organizational plans. After that, we'll walk through the step-by-step planning process and finally wrap up with navigating storms and barriers.
Section 1. The rudder of your business, defining the steering mechanism. Let's dive in.
So, before we plot our course, we really have to understand the tool we're using. Fun fact, the word planning actually traces back to the French word prévoyance, which simply means to foresee. And management legend Peter Drucker, he put it brilliantly. He said, planning is determining what must be done today to be ready for tomorrow. It's the ultimate exercise in proactive foresight. Basically, it's predicting the rain so you can build an umbrella today. Now, obviously, if you knew exactly what the future held, you wouldn't even need to plan. But because the business environment is incredibly unpredictable, we have to look ahead. We have to prepare our decisions way before the storm actually hits.
And look, planning isn't just some tedious paperwork exercise or, a box to check in Q4. It is a deeply intellectual process. It requires real imagination and reflective thinking to bridge the gap between where you are right now and where you want to be. And here's the crucial part. It is the primary management function. You quite literally cannot organize, lead, or control your team if you haven't laid down the plan first. It precedes the whole shebang. Plus, to keep the enterprise moving, this process has to be continuous, and it absolutely has to be flexible enough to adapt to constantly changing markets.
Moving on to Section 2, the 3 levels of planning, the crew and the course.
You can't sail a ship alone, right? The crew has to divide this navigational work. And the rule of 3 is honestly the easiest way to memorize how this cascades down through an organization. At the top management level, you've got strategic planning for the long term. We're talking 5 years out, setting the broad vision. Middle management, they handle tactical planning for the medium term. They're translating that grand strategy into specific departmental resources and budgets, usually over a 1 or 2 year span. And finally, lower management deals with operational planning in the short term. That's the daily, highly specific execution, stuff under a year that keeps the engine running.
Now, what's really interesting here is looking at how time is actually spent. Top management spends significantly more time on planning than anyone else in the organization. Why? Because charting a long-term destination in a chaotic, competitive environment takes immense cognitive effort. It takes constant scanning. If the executives aren't constantly scanning the horizon, well, the whole ship could run aground, no matter how hard or efficiently that engine room is working.
Section 3, types of organizational plans, charting the map.
A master navigator needs different tools for different phases of the journey. We can broadly categorize these into 2 buckets. On one side, we've got single-use plans. Think of these as a unique project or maybe a one-off company merger. Once that specific goal is achieved, you toss the map. On the flip side are standing plans. These are your everyday sailing procedures, your HR vacation policy, standard operating procedures, things like that. They exist so your team doesn't have to reinvent the wheel every single time a standard operational challenge pops up.
And this brings up another vital distinction: action versus reaction. Action plans let you proactively operationalize your goals. You dictate the terms. Reaction plans, those are your contingencies for the unforeseen. Every good navigator absolutely needs contingencies to cope with uncertainty. But, and this is a big but, you want your organization heavily weighted towards action. If you find yourself relying way too much on reaction plans, honestly, you're not navigating anymore, you're just a full-time firefighter.
All right, Section 4, the step-by-step planning process, setting the sails. So how do we actually do this? Let's see how this builds. It breaks down into 5 actionable macro steps. Step 1, awareness and objectives. That means understanding your environment and setting crystal clear, measurable end goals. Step 2 is developing premises, which is really just a fancy way of saying making intelligent assumptions and forecasts about future markets. Step 3 is evaluating alternatives, because let's face it, there's rarely only one path up the mountain. You have to weigh the strong and weak points of each.
Step 4 is pulling the trigger, selecting a course of action. And finally, Step 5, budgeting and implementation. Because a plan without a budget and without motivated people to execute it, well, that's just a daydream.
Actually, let's pause for a second on a real game changer for when you're stuck evaluating those alternatives. The principle of the limiting factor. This principle states that when you're comparing different paths, you absolutely must place the most emphasis on your scarcest resource. Is your limiting factor cash? Is it time? Or maybe highly skilled labor? By identifying what you're most short on, you instantly cut through all the noise. You narrow down your options to the one path that's actually feasible and most favorable for your reality.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, Navigating Storms and Barriers, Weathering the Storm.
Listen, no matter how perfect your plan is on paper, you are going to hit environmental storms. It's inevitable. But when they hit, a proper plan acts as both your anchor and your compass. It minimizes risk by replacing gut feelings with rational facts. It gives a clear sense of direction so your entire team is pulling the rope the exact same way. It establishes performance standards so you know if you're drifting off course. And crucially, it forces you to develop those what-if contingency scenarios so you aren't caught completely off guard.
That being said, there are internal barriers that can shred even the most beautiful map. If your goals are unclear or unattainable, the crew just won't buy in. If you have a poor reward system, execution will inevitably fail because people naturally only engage in behaviors that get rewarded. Dynamic, chaotic environments, yeah, they make forecasting incredibly tough. But perhaps the most dangerous barrier of all is top management inertia. That happens when leaders are so bogged down fighting today's fires that they leave absolutely no time for long-range reflective thinking.
And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this explainer. All the theories, the frameworks, the step-by-step processes, they all boil down to one fundamental challenge for you and your organization. So I want to leave you with this question to reflect on today. Are you charting your course or are you just reacting to the wind? Take hold of the rudder, apply these principles, and steer your organization exactly where it needs to go.